In the early hours of January 3rd, 2026, while much of the world was still drifting through the quiet aftermath of the new year, a rare and tightly controlled military sequence unfolded over parts of Venezuela. Fast, silent, and meticulously calculated. There were no air raid sirens, no declaration of war, no live broadcasts to warn the public. Within just a few short hours, sections of Venezuelan airspace and key strategic zones entered a state of temporary disruption and control, as a precision raid directed by the United States was set into motion. According to regional security analysts, this was not an impulsive strike. The operation of January 3rd was the culmination of months of quiet preparation, electronic surveillance, signal interception, target verification, and strategic positioning carried out far from public view. This was not an invasion, not an occupation, but a short-duration, highly selective strike designed to deliver a clear strategic message. Under the cover of darkness, communication systems in several areas were disrupted. Radar readings showed unusual interference. The first explosions echoed through the night while most civilians were still asleep, unaware that the balance around them had already shifted. By the time the sun rose over Caracas, the situation was no longer the same as it had been just hours earlier. What makes this operation significant is not only how it was executed, but what followed: the regional security consequences, the diplomatic shockwaves, and the human lives caught between decisions made far above them. What the public witnessed was only clearly visible on the surface. What truly shaped the event unfolded behind closed doors. And to understand the raid of January 3rd, 2026, we must look back to the moments before the first shot was ever fired. The Caribbean Sea did not change that morning. It remained wide and blue, indifferent to human loss, breathing in its ancient rhythm against the southern coast of Cuba. Fishing boats rocked gently in place. Nets dried in the sun. Seagulls circled with the same hunger they had carried for centuries. Nothing in the sky suggested that 32 lives had already ended. Nothing warned the mothers. Morning arrived the way it always did, with weak coffee, cracked radios, and the quiet routines of women who had learned to survive on little. In kitchens no larger than closets, mothers moved slowly, not yet knowing that their lives had already been divided into before and after. The radio voice came without ceremony. It was calm, measured, official. It did not tremble. The nation announces with deep regret the loss of 32 Cuban servicemen assigned to an international protection mission in Venezuela. The sentence continued, but many mothers never heard the rest. Some froze with their hands around chipped cups. Some sat down because their legs forgot how to stand. Some simply stared forward, waiting, foolishly, for the voice to correct itself. It never did. Rosa was one of the women who sat. She lowered herself into a wooden chair that her son Miguel had repaired with his own hands 2 years earlier. One leg had cracked. He had laughed while fixing it, sweat on his forehead, grease on his fingers. "You sit too hard, Mama," he had joked. Miguel was 27 when he left. He had packed lightly, as if weight itself might delay his return. A change of clothes, a photograph of his parents when they were young, a small medal he never admitted mattered to him. He had kissed Rosa's forehead at the door. "Just a few months," he said. "I'll be back before the rains." Rosa remembered that moment with cruel clarity. The way his arms felt solid, warm, alive, the way his voice carried confidence that she did not share. That morning, after the radio went silent, Rosa tried to stand. Her body refused. The chair held her, but nothing else did. Across the island, in homes separated by hills, sugar fields, and distance, the same silence spread. 32 kitchens, 32 women, 32 moments when the world narrowed to a single unbearable truth. Carmen stood in her doorway holding a knife she had forgotten to put down. An onion lay half cut on the table, its sharp smell filling the room. Her eyes burned, but not from the onion. Her son Luis had been afraid of the dark as a child. He slept with a lamp on until he was nearly 10. He used to press his feet against the wall at night, convinced something lived beneath the bed. Now the state said he had stood watch through long nights in Venezuela, guarding a man Carmen had only seen in speeches and posters. She wondered things no one would ever answer. Did Luis shake when the gunfire began? Did he remember the way she used to sing to him when storms frightened him? Did he die quickly, or did fear have time to settle in his chest? The knife slipped from her hand and clattered to the floor. She did not bend to retrieve it. By noon, the officials began to arrive. They came in pressed shirts and careful shoes, carrying folders that felt heavier than coffins. They spoke softly, respectfully, with phrases memorized long before this day. They said the sons were heroes. They said the mission was necessary. They said the nation was grateful. They did not say how the men died. They did not say where their bodies were. They did not say when the mothers might see them again. In many cases, they never would. There were no coffins to bury, no faces to kiss one last time, no hands to hold as the earth closed, only documents, thin paper, official stamps, ink that bled slightly in the heat. One sentence repeated itself like a wound, killed in the line of international duty. Rosa folded the paper until her fingers hurt. Carmen placed hers on the table and covered it with a cloth, as if hiding it might soften its meaning. Others tucked the papers into drawers, between folded clothes, beside photographs of boys who still smiled. The government encouraged restraint. Public mourning was permitted, but controlled. Tears were understandable, but not excessive. Anger was discouraged. Above all, the mothers were told to be proud. Pride, they were assured, was the proper response. But pride is fragile when a bed remains untouched, when shoes wait by the door for steps that will never return, when the silence at dinner grows heavier each night. At night, when speeches ended and radios were turned off, the mothers lay awake with questions that had nowhere to go. They spoke their sons' names into the dark, quietly, as if afraid someone might hear. Some imagined footsteps outside their doors. Some dreamed of voices calling for them. Some woke reaching for air. None of them slept deeply again. In the days that followed, the island returned to routine. Buses ran. Markets opened. Children laughed in the streets. Life, indifferent and cruel, continued. Only the mothers changed. They moved more slowly. They listened less. They learned how heavy silence could be when it settled into the bones. And always, beyond the villages and fields, the Caribbean Sea remained blue, unchanged, unmoved, unaware. Night fell differently in Venezuela. It came fast, heavy, and without mercy, swallowing heat, sound, and certainty in a way the Caribbean never did. The air carried dust instead of salt, tension instead of wind. For the 32 Cuban men stationed there, night was no longer a time to rest. It was a time to listen. to count footsteps, to measure silence. They had been told this mission was defensive, protective, temporary. They were there to guard a president, not to fight a war. Yet war has a way of finding those who believe they are merely passing through. The compound lay on the edge of the city, ringed with concrete barriers and dim lights that flickered more than they illuminated. Radios whispered constantly, fragments of instructions, warnings half-spoken, names cut short by static. Miguel stood near the outer gate, his rifle resting against his shoulder, sweat running down his spine beneath the uniform. He had learned not to wipe it away. Any movement, no matter how small, felt dangerous now. He thought of his mother's kitchen, not because he wanted to, but because memory had begun to intrude without permission. He remembered the sound of a spoon against a chipped cup, the smell of coffee too weak to wake him properly, the way Rosa's hands always lingered when she touched his face. He pushed the thought away. This was not the place for memory. Luis was further inside the perimeter, assigned to a rotating watch near the administrative building. He had stopped checking the time hours ago. Time felt unreliable here, stretching, collapsing, losing meaning. He focused on counting breaths, in, out, slow. Fear did not arrive suddenly. It seeped in, settling quietly in the chest, making itself at home. Luis told himself he was not afraid, but his body disagreed. Every distant sound became a question. Every shadow felt intentional. He wondered if fear always felt like this, less like panic, more like waiting. The first explosion did not come from where they expected. It came from behind. A flash, a concussion that shook the ground, a sound so loud it erased thought. For a moment, everything stopped. Then the shouting began. Orders overlapped. Radios screamed. Men moved without knowing exactly where they were going. Miguel ran. He did not remember deciding to. His legs simply carried him forward, training overtaking instinct. Smoke filled the air, thick and bitter. Somewhere nearby, someone was screaming, not in pain yet, but in warning. Gunfire followed, sharp, relentless, close. Miguel fired back, his hand steady in a way that surprised him. There was no room for fear now, only motion, only survival. He did not see the face of the man who fired at him. He saw only the flash, the impact, the sudden weightlessness in his chest. He fell without understanding why. Luis heard Miguel's name shouted once. He never heard it again. The compound was chaos. Lights went out, walls cracked. The carefully constructed idea of control dissolved in seconds. This was not a warning, not a demonstration. This was an attack meant to end things. Luis took cover behind a concrete barrier, heart pounding so hard it hurt. He fired when shapes moved. He stopped when they didn't. At some point, he realized his hands were shaking violently. He pressed them against the ground to steady himself. "Stay focused," he whispered aloud, though no one had spoken to him. He thought absurdly of the lamp he used to leave on as a child. He wondered if his mother still remembered that. Then the blast came, closer than the first, hotter, final. By dawn, it was over. Not because peace had returned, but because there was nothing left to fight. The attackers were gone. The compound stood broken, silent, filled with the smell of smoke and blood. Survivors moved carefully, as if afraid the ground itself might betray them again. 32 Cuban men did not rise. Some lay where they had fallen. Some were found later, in corners, behind barriers, hands still gripping weapons they no longer needed. There were no final words recorded, no last messages sent. Death had come too quickly for that. News traveled slowly. And then, all at once, in Havana, phones rang before dawn. In villages and towns across Cuba, officials prepared statements while families slept, unaware that their lives were already about to fracture. When morning arrived, it arrived unevenly. For some mothers, the radio spoke first. For others, a knock on the door. The knock was the worst. Measured, official, unavoidable. Rosa knew before she opened it. Some knowledge does not require confirmation. The man on her doorstep removed his hat. He did not meet her eyes. His voice was gentle, rehearsed. She did not hear most of what he said. She heard only one thing. Miguel. The name hung between them, fragile, final. Rosa nodded. She surprised herself by doing so. Inside her, something collapsed quietly, like a building given way long after the explosion. Carmen was told by a neighbor. The woman stood in the doorway, pale, hands clasped too tightly together. "I'm sorry," she said. That was all. Carmen sat down on the floor. She did not cry. She pressed her back against the wall and stared ahead, as if waiting for further instructions that never came. The onion from the previous day still sat on the table, dried now, forgotten. Everything unfinished suddenly felt permanent. In the days that followed, the mothers learned details they had never asked for. There had been explosions. There had been gunfire. There had been chaos. But no one could tell them exactly how their sons had died. Each story blurred into the next. Officials spoke of bravery, of resistance, of sacrifice. The mothers listened politely. Then they went home and sat in rooms that felt too large, too empty, too final. Some mothers dreamed of their sons calling out. Others dreamed of nothing at all. Rosa dreamed of Miguel standing in the doorway, wet from rain, smiling apologetically. "I'm late," he said. She woke with her hands reaching forward, her heart racing, her mouth already forming his name. Carmen dreamed of darkness, thick, endless, silent. She woke, gasping, convinced the lamp was broken, the room too dark. She turned on every light. Still, it was not enough. Time began to behave strangely. Days passed too slowly. Weeks vanished without memory. Grief did not move forward. It circled. The mothers began to avoid mirrors. Their faces felt unfamiliar now. Older, heavier, marked by something invisible but unmistakable. They spoke less. When they did speak, it was often to say their sons' names, quietly, as if practicing them, afraid of forgetting how they sounded. At night, when the island slept, the mothers lay awake. They wondered where their sons' bodies were now, whether they were buried together or apart, whether someone had closed their eyes. They wondered if their sons had been afraid, and most of all, they wondered if this pain would ever loosen its grip. It did not. It settled in, permanent, unyielding, alive. Grief did not arrive all at once. It unfolded. It settled into the small hours of the morning, into the space between breaths, into the moments when habit reached for what no longer existed. The mothers of the 32 learned quickly that grief was not a storm that passed through. It was a climate. Weeks after the announcement, life around them resumed its familiar rhythms. Buses ran late. Markets opened early. Radios played music between speeches. Children laughed in the streets with the careless cruelty of the living. The mothers watched all of this from a distance, as if through thick glass. They moved through their days performing the motions they remembered: cooking, sweeping, folding clothes. but something essential had been removed from each act. Meaning had drained away, leaving behind repetition without purpose. Rosa still set 2 cups on the table some mornings before realizing what she had done. She never corrected it right away. She would sit there, staring at the empty chair across from her, letting the mistake exist for a while. It felt closer to truth than pretending she had already learned to live with absence. Miguel's room remained untouched, not because she believed he might return. She was not that cruel to herself, but because removing his presence felt like killing him again, slowly, deliberately, with her own hands. Carmen tried to clean. At first, she told herself it was necessary. The house felt heavy, crowded with memory. She began with Luis's clothes, folding them carefully, as if precision might protect her from breaking apart. But when she reached his shoes, she stopped. They were worn unevenly, the left heel more damaged than the right. She remembered noticing it once, teasing him about his walk. He had shrugged, smiled. She sat on the floor and held the shoes against her chest. She did not cry loudly. She did not scream. She simply rocked, back and forth, as if motion alone could keep her upright. The state organized a memorial. It was held in a large hall in the capital, decorated with flags and portraits. 32 names were read aloud. 32 candles were lit. The mothers were seated in the front rows. They were told where to sit, when to stand, when to bow their heads. Speeches were given. Words like honor and eternal gratitude filled the room, floating above the women like smoke. Applause followed each declaration of sacrifice. The mothers clapped because everyone else did. Their hands moved, but their hearts did not follow. No one asked them what they felt. No one asked if the price had been worth it. When the ceremony ended, officials shook their hands and thanked them for their strength. Strength! The word felt hollow. What they had wasn't strength, it was endurance. At night, the mothers spoke to their sons, not out loud, not often, but inwardly in the quiet language grief invents. They asked questions they already knew would never be answered. Were you afraid? Did it hurt? Did you know how much I loved you? Some mothers imagined their sons at peace, free of pain, proud of what they had done. Others could not. They saw instead the chaos, the fear, the violence of that final night in Venezuela. Their minds filled the silence with images too vivid to escape. Rosa tried not to imagine Miguel's final moments, but imagination is stubborn. It came to her in flashes. Smoke, noise, confusion, until she learned to interrupt it deliberately, forcing her thoughts elsewhere. She began to remember him as a child instead, running barefoot on hot pavement, laughing with his mouth open, unguarded, falling asleep with his head in her lap. Those memories hurt too, but they hurt in a way that felt clean, honest. Some mothers felt pride, others felt anger. Many felt both, tangled together so tightly they could not be separated. Pride that their sons had been brave. Anger that bravery had been demanded at all. They did not speak of this conflict openly. It was dangerous territory. Emotionally, politically, socially. So they carried it silently. At the market, on the bus, in bed at night. Grief taught them how heavy silence could be. As months passed, people stopped asking how they were doing. Time, after all, moves forward. It always expects everyone else to follow. The mothers learn to answer automatically. I'm fine. I manage. It gets easier. None of these statements were true. What actually happened was simpler and crueler. They learned how to live around the pain. They learned which thoughts to avoid in public, which rooms to enter carefully, which dates to survive. They learned that grief does not shrink. It becomes familiar. One afternoon, Rosa walked to the shore. She had not planned to. Her feet simply carried her there, as if they remembered something she did not. The sea stretched before her, endlessly blue, unchanged. She watched the waves for a long time. Then, quietly, she spoke. "I sent you away," she said. "I told you to go." The word surprised her. She'd never allowed herself to think that before. Guilt rose in her chest, sharp and immediate. But beneath it, something else stirred, a fragile understanding. She'd not truly sent him away. The world had taken him. Systems, decisions, forces far beyond a mother's reach. She had loved him. That was all. Carmen planted a small tree behind her house. She did not tell anyone why. Each morning she watered it carefully, watching it grow. She spoke to it sometimes, not because she believed it listened, but because speaking kept her from disappearing into herself. The tree did not replace her son. Nothing could. But it grew. And in its quiet persistence, Carmen found something she had not expected. Not comfort, but continuity. Years would pass. The 32 names would be spoken less frequently. The mission would become a paragraph in history books. The speeches would fade, but the mothers would remain. Older, quieter, still carrying the weight of what had been asked of them. They would never cry loudly. Not because they did not want to, but because grief had taken them somewhere beyond tears, into a place where sound felt unnecessary. They would carry their sons in memory, in habit, in the invisible adjustments of everyday life. And when they died, someday, people would say they were strong women. They would not mention the cost. The Caribbean Sea would remain blue. Waves would continue their ancient rhythm against the shore of Cuba. And somewhere between the water and the sky, 32 lives would linger, not as symbols, not as slogans, but as sons. Forever missed, forever carried, forever loved.